In August 2019, a single tweet from the Oval Office didn't just shock the world. It made the international community wonder if the President of the United States had finally lost touch with reality. He wanted to buy Greenland. The media laughed. The Danish Prime Minister called it absurd. Comedians spent weeks mocking the idea of Trump Tower, Nuuk. But behind the headlines and the memes, something much more calculated was happening. Intelligence agencies in Beijing weren't laughing. Neither were the strategists in the Kremlin. Because while the public saw a billionaire looking for a real estate deal, the Pentagon saw a $30 trillion fortress that holds the keys to the next century of global dominance. If you think this was just about land, you're missing the most dangerous financial and geopolitical chess move of our lifetime. If you look at a map, Greenland looks like a massive frozen wasteland. But to the people who control the world's money, it's a gold mine buried under a melting shield. We are talking about a territory 3 times the size of Texas that is sitting on the world's largest untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, the exact materials needed for every iPhone, Tesla battery, and F-35 fighter jet on the planet. Right now, China controls 90% of that supply. They have a literal chokehold on the future of technology. If the US doesn't find its own source, the American economy remains at the mercy of Beijing. But there's a catch. Greenland isn't just about what's in the ground, it's about the water surrounding it. As the ice melts, a new Silk Road of the sea is opening up, a shipping route that could bypass the Suez Canal and shave weeks off global trade. Whoever controls Greenland controls the toll booth for the 21st century. But how did we get here? To understand why a US president would risk a diplomatic war over a block of ice, we have to look at the math of the Arctic Gap. Greenland has been under the Danish crown since the 1700s, but it's always been an economic headache for Denmark. It costs the Danish government nearly $700 million every single year just to keep the lights on in Nuuk. For a small European nation, that's a heavy burden. For the United States, that's a rounding error. It's less than the cost of a single B-2 bomber. Historically, the US has actually tried to buy Greenland 3 times before. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward, the same man who bought Alaska, tried to grab it. In 1946, Harry Truman offered $100 million in gold. Each time, the logic was the same. Greenland is a stationary aircraft carrier that sits exactly halfway between Washington and Moscow. During the Cold War, it was the front line of the nuclear umbrella. If a missile was launched from the Soviet Union, the radars in Greenland were the only thing giving the US a 20-minute warning. But in the 2020s, the threat changed. It wasn't just about nukes anymore, it was about the Polar Silk Road. Imagine you are a logistics company shipping goods from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Normally, you go through the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Suez Canal. It's a 45-day trip filled with pirates and narrow choke points. But if the Arctic ice continues to recede, you can cut straight over the top of the world. This reduces the journey by 40% and saves millions in fuel. Greenland is the gatekeeper of this route. China knows this. In 2018, they officially declared themselves a near-Arctic state, even though they aren't anywhere near the Arctic. They started offering to build 3 massive international airports in Greenland. They were ready to pour billions into infrastructure. To the US, this looked like the classic debt trap diplomacy we've seen in Africa and Sri Lanka. If China owns the airports in Greenland, they own a piece of the North American defense perimeter. Trump's offer wasn't a random whim. It was a desperate, preemptive bid to out-hustle China before they could plant a flag in America's backyard. But here is the hidden mechanism that most people ignore: the rare earth monopoly. Your smartphone contains about 16 different rare earth elements. Without them, the screen doesn't light up, the speakers don't vibrate, and the battery doesn't hold a charge. Currently, if China decided to stop exporting these minerals tomorrow, the global tech industry would grind to a halt in weeks. It is the ultimate economic weapon. Greenland happens to hold the Kvanefjeld deposit, one of the largest concentrations of these minerals in the world. By buying Greenland, or at least securing total influence over it, the US would effectively break China's monopoly and secure its own industrial future for the next 200 years. It's the ultimate hedge against a trade war. So why did the deal fail? And more importantly, why is the tension actually increasing now, long after Trump left office? The problem is the 56,000 people who actually live there. Most are indigenous Inuit who have spent decades fighting for autonomy from Denmark. They don't want to be traded like a monopoly property between two superpowers. However, Greenland's economy is currently built on a paradox. They want independence, but they can't afford it. They rely on the Danish block grant for 20% of their GDP. To truly be free, they need to mine those minerals. But mining those minerals requires massive foreign investment. If they take the money from China, they anger the US. If they take the money from the US, they feel like they are just swapping one colonial master for another. This is the independence trap. This is where it gets dark. Because the ice is melting faster than anyone predicted, the window to secure these assets is closing. We are entering a period of resource fever. Russia has already begun militarizing its Arctic coast, building shamrock bases, and deploying icebreakers armed with cruise missiles. They are stake-claiming the seabed. The US, meanwhile, has reopened its consulate in Nuuk and is funneling economic aid into the island to counter Chinese influence. But there's a secret that the headlines don't talk about. The US doesn't actually need to buy the island to control it. Through a series of defense treaties dating back to 1951, the US already has unfiltered access to parts of Greenland, including the Patuxent Space Base. But the ownership talk was a signal. It was a message to the world that the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that no foreign power should interfere in the Americas, now extends all the way to the North Pole. To understand the sheer scale of the wealth we're talking about, we have to look at the wealth of nations through a geological lens. Most countries are rich because of what they do, like Japan's manufacturing or Switzerland's banking. But Greenland is a country that will be rich because of what it is. Beneath the ice sheet lies an estimated 10% of the world's remaining fresh water, massive oil and gas reserves, and enough iron ore to fuel a global construction boom. For centuries, this wealth was locked away by miles of ice. It was inaccessible and therefore worthless. But as global temperatures rise, that ice is turning into liquid gold. This brings us to the sovereign wealth strategy. Think about Norway. 50 years ago, Norway was a modest fishing nation. Then they discovered oil. Instead of spending it all, they created a sovereign wealth fund that is now worth over $1.5 trillion. Greenland has the potential to be Norway on steroids. But unlike Norway, Greenland is sitting in the middle of a tug-of-war between three nuclear-armed superpowers, the US, Russia, and China. In the corporate world, if you want to stop a competitor from taking over a valuable startup, you don't necessarily have to buy the whole company. You just need a poison pill or a blocking stake. That is exactly what the United States did. By publicly announcing an interest in buying Greenland, the US effectively put a keep out sign on the island. It told the Danish government and the Greenlandic parliament that any major Chinese investment would be viewed as a threat to US national security. The result? The airport deals with China were scrapped. The mining projects were put on hold. The US won the first round without spending a single dollar of the purchase price. But the game is far from over. In 2026, the Arctic is more crowded than ever. We are seeing a phenomenon called gray zone warfare. This isn't about tanks and soldiers. It's about fishing rights, undersea cables, and scientific research stations that look suspiciously like intelligence outposts. Russia has recently reactivated over 50 Soviet-era military bases in the Arctic. They are building a specialized Arctic army. Why? Because they know that as the permafrost melts, the northern sea route becomes the most important economic artery in the world. Russia wants to tax every ship that passes through. The US, using Greenland as its anchor, wants to ensure freedom of navigation. This is why the absurd idea of buying Greenland will likely resurface in the next decade, regardless of who is in the White House. The economic gravity of the North Pole is too strong to ignore. So what should you, the viewer, take away from this? First, understand that in the world of high finance and geopolitics, there is no such thing as an absurd idea, only ideas that are ahead of their time. Greenland is the most undervalued asset on the planet right now. It is a massive option contract on the future of energy, shipping, and defense. Second, watch the minerals. The next decade of the global economy won't be won by software. It will be won by the countries that control the physical elements of the green transition. If Greenland ever does become independent, expect a gold rush that will make the 1849 California rush look like a bake sale. But the real story isn't about real estate. It's about the fact that as our planet changes, the map of power is being redrawn. The North Atlantic is becoming the new Mediterranean, and the quiet, frozen island of Greenland is the new center of the world. The mocked Greenland Purchase wasn't a joke. It was the first shot in a new Cold War, one fought not with ideologies, but with drills, dredging ships, and deep-sea cables. It was a reminder that in the grand theater of history, land is the only thing they aren't making any more of. When we look back at the 21st century, we might realize that the most important geopolitical event wasn't a war in the desert or a stock market crash in New York. It was the moment the world's largest island began to thaw, revealing a treasure chest that everyone was willing to fight for. As the ice continues to thin, the world is finding out that the most expensive thing you can own isn't a city or a company. It's a gateway to the future. And in that race, the United States is realizing that some things are too valuable to be left to chance. The question isn't if Greenland will be the center of a global conflict, but whether the world is ready for what happens when the ice finally disappears and reveals the true price of the North. Because once the vault is open, there's no going back. The real reason Trump wanted to buy Greenland wasn't about ego or real estate or making a deal. It was about ensuring that when the world eventually pivots to the Arctic, America isn't standing on the sidelines. It was an insurance policy for a future where the North Pole is the new heart of global trade. And as it turns out, in the game of nations, absurd is just another word for strategic. The map is changing, the money is moving, and the ice is melting. The only question left is, who will be standing there to claim the land once the white fades to green?